Berlin. Winter of 1943. The snow fell in silence, muffling the distant thunder of a war already turning against Germany. Inside a concrete hangar, the air was heavy with the smell of fuel and frost. Under dim yellow light, a small group of engineers gathered around something that did not belong to them. It was an American fighter. Slender, streamlined, alien. To the German eye, it was a paradox. Too light to be durable, too simple to be revolutionary, too American to be dangerous. They studied its curves and laughed. The arrogance of it, the open cockpit, the wide wings, the absence of armor. "This is what they think will win the skies?" one of them said. The others smiled, confident in their Messerschmitts, their Focke-Wulfs, their doctrine of superiority. They did not see what lay hidden beneath the metal. They could not understand the language of its simplicity, the quiet genius of a design that put efficiency above ideology. For them, the war was still a contest of glory and pride. For America, it was mathematics, speed, distance, altitude, production. And on that cold morning, as the men of the Reich laughed at a machine they thought they understood, they were unknowingly staring at the blueprint of their own defeat. Because this was not just another fighter plane. It was the shape of a new kind of warfare, one that could reach farther, climb higher, and strike deeper than anything the world had seen before. The men in that hangar believed they were dissecting an enemy. In truth, they were performing an autopsy on themselves. What they didn't know was that this machine would one day own the sky.
It began not with thunder, but with paper. A blank sheet on a drafting table in California, July 1940. The British were desperate for fighters. The Americans had none to spare. So a new company, young and brash, North American Aviation, made a promise. "We'll design you one, from scratch, in 120 days. It sounded impossible, and in truth it nearly was. What they built first was crude, aluminum bones riveted by trembling hands. An engine that gasped for air above 15,000 feet, a cockpit that shook at high speed. Early test pilots returned with white faces and bruised ribs. Reports were merciless. Unstable, underpowered, not combat-worthy. Even within the Allied command, it was ridiculed. The British called it a good idea executed badly. The Americans, already obsessed with the P-40 and the P-38, saw no reason to waste more time. But inside that factory, a few engineers refused to give up. They stared at the lines of the fuselage, long, slender, and almost too perfect. The laminar flow wing, the new radiator scoop, the balance of lift and drag, they all hinted at something buried deep beneath failure. The problem wasn't the body, it was the heart. The Allison engine, powerful at low altitudes, suffocated where the war was being fought, high above the clouds, where contrails wrote the fate of nations. Still, the design survived every attempt to kill it. The factory floor smelled of burnt metal and defiance. The draftsmen didn't know it yet, but they were creating one of the purest expressions of aeronautical logic ever forged by human hands. Every rivet, every curve, every mistake was building toward a quiet revelation. And one day, when the right engine met the right airframe, the world would finally understand what they had made. No one imagined that the apparent failure lying in those dusty Californian hangars carried within it the seed of domination. No one imagined that a rejected machine would soon become the monster of the skies. What was born in struggle would return in vengeance.
The first time the Mustang went to war, it did not roar.
It coughed. It entered the skies over Europe in 1942, carrying high hopes and a heart that could not breathe above the clouds. The Allison engine that powered it was fast down low but gasped thin air above 15,000 feet. And war, real war, was being fought far higher than that. Pilots cursed it quietly. They wanted a fighter, not a compromise. Its range was short, its ceiling low, its power limited. In the calm language of the reports, it was described as insufficient for air superiority. In the sharper words of the men who risked their lives inside it, it was a coffin with wings. The Luftwaffe noticed. Their reports were brief and confident. No threat at altitude, easily outrun, inferior climb. In the eyes of German aces, the P-51 was just another Western experiment, another lesson in why precision could never replace instinct, and why numbers could never replace experience. When the first squadrons of Mustang arrived in the European theater, they were assigned not to air combat, but to reconnaissance and ground attack. They photographed enemy positions and strafed convoys, too slow to fight, too valuable to waste. To the men who built it, this was humiliation. The great promise of the American superfighter was reduced to a scout. Mechanics worked through the night, swapping propellers, adjusting fuel mixtures, trying to wring miracles from an engine that simply wasn't designed for the job. Each test flight ended the same way. The plane performed beautifully at low altitude, then wheezed, shuddered, and stalled as it climbed into the freezing air. By late 1942, even its champions began to lose faith. North American aviation had built a masterpiece of engineering wrapped around a dying heart. It was the perfect body for the wrong soul. For the Germans, it was proof that American engineering could be clever, but not dangerous. For the Allies, it was a bitter lesson in restraint, a reminder that perfection on paper means nothing if the machine cannot survive the sky. Yet somewhere, amid the frustration and the laughter, a few engineers still believed there was something special hidden in that airframe. They couldn't prove it, not yet, but they could feel it, in the way it handled, in the way it held energy in a dive, in the quiet promise that it was built for something greater. The Mustang had tasted combat, and the taste was bitter. But beneath the embarrassment of its first failure, the story of its redemption had already begun to shape. For now, the world saw only defeat. No one imagined that the same machine dismissed as a failure would soon climb higher, fly farther, and turn the laughter of its enemies into silence.
History rarely announces its turning points. They arrive quietly, disguised as experiments, compromises, or coincidences. For the P-51 Mustang, that moment began not in America, but in England. In the spring of 1943, an RAF engineer named Ronald Harker watched one of the American fighters land at an airfield in Hertfordshire. He had read the reports, mediocre, flawed, limited. But as he examined the plane, something about its design bothered him. It wasn't the failure everyone claimed it was. Its airframe was brilliant, strong, aerodynamic, almost elegant in its balance. The problem, he realized, was simple. It was breathing through the wrong lungs. The British had something better. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, a 12-cylinder, liquid-cooled masterpiece that powered the legendary Spitfire and Hurricane. It could climb where the Allison gasped, fight where others stalled, and sing in the thin air above 25,000 feet. So Harker wrote a proposal, short, almost casual, suggesting they try fitting the Merlin into the American Mustang. Few people noticed that memo at first. It was just one more idea among 100 wartime improvisations.
But when the first test aircraft rolled out, its impact was immediate and irreversible. The hybrid machine leapt from the runway like it had been waiting its entire life for that engine. Where it once crawled, it now soared. Where it once gasped, it now roared. Top speed, 440 miles per hour. Operational ceiling, over 40,000 feet. Range, beyond 1,600 kilometers. In a single stroke, the P-51 had become something new, not a replacement, not a correction, but an evolution. The body of American engineering and the heart of British innovation had fused into one, and together they had created a weapon that no nation on Earth could match. At first, only a handful of pilots flew the modified Mustang. They returned from their missions with a strange, almost reverent silence. When asked how it handled, they said only this: "It flies like it's thinking ahead of you." Word spread through the squadrons like wildfire. A fighter that could outclimb the M109, outdive the FW-190, escort bombers deep into Germany and still make it home with fuel to spare. It was more than a machine. It was the return of hope with wings. German intelligence noticed the change. At first, they thought the Allies had introduced an entirely new aircraft. When they realized it was the same Mustang they had dismissed as useless, a chill spread through command. This was no minor upgrade. This was a paradigm shift. The Allies now had a fighter that could follow the bombers all the way to Berlin and back again. Every city, every airfield, every fuel depot that had once been safe was now within its reach of guns. The turning point had come, invisible and irreversible. Not with fanfare, not with ceremony, but with a single perfect harmony between two engines of freedom, one forged in Britain, the other born in America. And somewhere above the clouds, where the air grew thin and history grew quiet, the Mustang finally found its voice. It did not whisper. It sang.
By 1944, the laughter had stopped. What began as a curiosity, an engineering experiment born of desperation, had become a sound that haunted the German sky. It started as a low, rhythmic hum, the Merlin's 12 cylinders singing in perfect balance, then rose into a scream that tore through the clouds. Every pilot on the ground knew it instantly. That sound meant death was coming. The P-51 Mustang now ruled the air. It could climb faster than the Messerschmitt. It could turn tighter than the Focke-Wulf, and it could fly longer than any of them dared to imagine. While the Luftwaffe fought in the shrinking airspace over its homeland, the Mustang reached out across an entire continent. It flew with the bombers to Berlin and back, defending them the whole way. Germany's advantage, altitude, range, surprise, vanished overnight. For the first time, Allied bombers could cross the heart of the Reich in daylight. Before the P-51, such missions were suicide. After the P-51, they became a matter of arithmetic. Every Mustang meant more bombers home, more bombs dropped, more factories silenced. The skies that once belonged to the Luftwaffe now belonged to precision and persistence. The German pilots could not understand it at first. They dove, fired, and watched their cannon shells bounce off the Mustang's armored frame. They climbed, only to be overtaken by a machine that shouldn't have been able to climb at all. They turned to fight and realized too late that the Mustang had already turned with them. The psychological toll was catastrophic. Luftwaffe aces who had once written about the joy of the hunt now described exhaustion, despair, and fear. They are everywhere, one report read. They appear from the sun, and there is no escape. Ground troops began calling the P-51 the Long Shadow, a presence that hovered, waited, then struck. Its 8.5 caliber Browning machine guns spat out nearly 6,400 rounds per minute, a solid wall of lead and flame. The sound was unmistakable, a hammering storm of steel, a mechanical thunder that seemed to split the air itself. In those moments, the sky no longer looked blue. It looked metallic, alive, and angry. Entire squadrons of German bombers vanished in minutes. Airfields burned, trains exploded, convoys that once traveled at night found no safety even in darkness, for the Mustang hunted by moonlight too. It wasn't just a plane anymore. It was a system of destruction, a doctrine in motion. The Reich's pilots began to measure their survival in seconds, not missions. And somewhere in the haze of exhaustion and smoke, even the proudest among them began to admit what they had once sworn impossible. The Americans had built a better machine. But more than that, they had built a different philosophy of war. The Mustang was fast, but it wasn't reckless. It was strong, but not heavy. It was efficient, elegant, and adaptable. Everything the ideology of the Reich refused to be. The same engineers who once mocked its simplicity now studied it in terror. They dismantled captured wrecks and found no mystery, no hidden trick, just logic, balance, precision. And that was the most frightening truth of all, that the Allies didn't need magic to win. They only needed reason. From the skies above Normandy to the ruins of Berlin, the thunder of the Mustang became a prophecy made real. Every roar of its engine said the same thing. The war no longer belongs to you. The empire that once dreamed of a 1,000-year Reich now watched its future burn under the wings of a machine that should never have existed. The same machine they had once laughed at, the one they had tried and failed to copy. The P-51 Mustang was more than a triumph of metal and fuel. It was a statement of philosophy. Every rivet, every weld, every stroke of paint carried an idea about what kind of world would survive this war. The Germans had built machines for glory. The Allies built them to endure. One side worshipped complexity, prestige, and ideology. The other believed in efficiency, collaboration, and scale. The difference was invisible to the naked eye, yet written in the sky for all to see. The Luftwaffe built aircraft that embodied pride, masterpieces of engineering that demanded expert pilots, perfect conditions, and endless resources. They were elegant but fragile, deadly but limited. They reflected the empire that made them, brilliant, rigid, and doomed by its own obsession with perfection. The Mustang was the opposite. It was not born from a vision of greatness, but from necessity, the relentless pressure of a world on fire. It wasn't designed for heroes. It was designed for anyone who could fly. A pilot didn't need to master it. He only needed to trust it. And that, perhaps, was its greatest weapon. It represented the power of collaboration, an American airframe, a British engine, Allied purpose. Each nation brought what it did best, and together they created something that none could have achieved alone. It was democracy made into aluminum. It was freedom translated into velocity. Where the Axis demanded conformity, the Allies rewarded ingenuity. Where the Reich enforced control, the Mustang rewarded initiative. In its simplicity, it carried an arrogance far greater than any propaganda could match. The confidence of a system that trusted its people to think, to build, to improve. As the war dragged on, factories in California and Texas produced Mustangs by the thousands. Each one identical in form, yet alive in spirit, stamped from the same mold, powered by the same belief. There were not monuments to a single genius, but to a collective mind, a shared resilience. Every Mustang that rolled off the line was an argument made in steel. that open collaboration could outfight closed ideology, that adaptability could overcome ambition, that freedom, the most chaotic of all forces, could, when focused, become the most efficient engine in the world. German engineers, once convinced of their superiority, now studied the Mustang in disbelief. They could not replicate it, not because they lacked skill, but because they lacked the humility to understand it. Its strength came not from its design, but from its philosophy. It was not a symbol of dominance, it was a symbol of balance. When General Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force, he understood this better than anyone else. He changed the mission of the escort fighters. No longer would they simply guard the bombers, they would own the air. With the Mustang's range and endurance, the Allies could strike anywhere, anytime, with precision and confidence. From that day on, the Luftwaffe was not an opponent, it was prey. The Mustang became the instrument of a new doctrine, the doctrine of adaptability, production, and intelligence. Power no longer meant strength alone. It meant the ability to change faster than the enemy could understand. That was its true gift. Not speed, not range, not firepower, but adaptation. In that way, the Mustang transcended war. It became the symbol of the world that would come after it, a world that rewarded reason over rage, cooperation over control, and innovation over ideology.
In the final winter of the war, the skies over Europe no longer belonged to the Reich. The once proud Luftwaffe, the sword of the Empire, the terror of Europe, now hid beneath clouds, moving only at night, like ghosts afraid of the dawn. Every sunrise carried the same metallic promise: the hum of engines, the glint of polished aluminum, and the echo of a single name whispered in fear: Mustang. What began as a prototype, doubted and dismissed, had become the instrument of inevitability. Factories that had once produced nightmares for the world now lay in ruins beneath the wings of what they once mocked. Every roar of the Merlin engine was a verdict rendered, not just against the enemy's machines, but against their belief in superiority itself. German commanders, who once boasted that no foreign aircraft could reach their skies, now watched contrails stretch endlessly toward Berlin. And when they saw the formation of silver specks gliding through the blue, they no longer prepared for battle. They prepared for the end. The irony was almost biblical. The very arrogance that had driven their war effort, their faith in complexity, in mastery, in control, had become their undoing. They tried to copy America's fighter. They tried to understand its secret. But they never realized that the secret wasn't in the blueprint, it was in the idea. The Mustang was more than a machine. It was an answer to tyranny, to despair, to the illusion that freedom was chaos. It proved that liberty, when forged with discipline, could create perfection, not in form, but in purpose. As German engineers sifted through the wreckage of their airfields, they found fragments of the plane they could never replicate. A scrap of fuselage, a twisted propeller, a burned-out Merlin cylinder. They studied them like relics of another civilization, not one that conquered, but one that endured. In those final days, as the Allies advanced and the Reich crumbled, the sound of the P-51 filled the air like a hymn. It wasn't the sound of vengeance. It was the sound of truth, spoken in the only language war understands. Power earned, not seized. And somewhere, high above the collapsing empire,
A German ace looked up through the smoke and saw a Mustang cut across the sun. For a moment, he wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He was silent. Because he finally understood what that sound meant. It wasn't just the noise of engines or bullets. It was the end of an age and the beginning of another. An age where the balance of the world would no longer belong to those who ruled by fear, but to those who built through courage, precision, and collaboration. They laughed once when they first saw it. They said it was clumsy, over-designed, uninspired. They said it could never threaten the Reich's supremacy. But when the Mustangs came, in endless waves, shining like liquid silver across the horizon, no one was laughing anymore. The same sky that had once been their kingdom now thundered with a different name. A name that was carried on the wind over cities reduced to ash and battlefields turned to mud. A name that would come to define an era of innovation, of unity, of power through purpose. The P-51 Mustang, the machine they couldn't copy, the sound they could never silence, the storm that ended the empire. They laughed when they first saw it, but when it came for them, the only sound left in the sky was the thunder of freedom.
It was the mechanical embodiment of a truth the war was slowly teaching everyone, that real power does not come from domination, but from the freedom to evolve.